So I've been working with QuickBooks, gosh, probably a good 15 years. A lot of times I think you'll hear all throughout probably the business community, various articles, how much people love or hate QuickBooks. And I think a lot of times there's so many haters out there and they just sometimes hate to hate. And then other reasons, there's reasons too. So I've been working with QuickBooks, gosh, probably a good 15 years. Gone through all the changes that it's been through from desktop to cloud version and seeing how that's transformed and helped clients along the way. And then I've been involved with some of the larger technology as well once you get to the point when you graduate from QuickBooks over the last 7 years, kind of digging into that with clients. So, looking at QuickBooks for 2024, there's been a couple of changes they've put into place. A lot of their solutions are kind of growing. They're trying to keep up with competitors out there. And so they're bringing in where you can have different licenses. It used to be QuickBooks, you had one license. And if you were on an enterprise version, you could have multiple licenses. But now they're rolling that out more to the cloud solutions. So it gives people different roles that they can see the software so they're not seeing everything, which is really good. So when looking at QuickBooks to determine if it's the right software solution for you, it isn't really narrowed down to maybe what industry, but more so what you're doing. Are you getting to a place where your company's growing? You have multiple companies that are maybe consolidated. QuickBooks doesn't have the consolidation. If you have inventory, you're moving that direction. QuickBooks doesn't have a way to manage inventory. It is really just a financial software for companies that are starting out. So if you're in the beginning stages of you have $0 or maybe you have millions of dollars and the solution still meets your needs, then QuickBooks is very good with invoicing and giving you decent financial reports. And now the good part is there's a lot of ancillary third-party softwares out there that can plug into QuickBooks and give you better reporting and allow you to not always use their solution. So a good example is payroll. You're not stuck with QuickBooks payroll. You can use a different third party. When looking at QuickBooks, one thing that, or a couple things actually, that they do really well is when you're first starting out, QuickBooks is a really easy to use software for the most part. If you have never used financial software, it creates your chart of accounts for you. Whether that's good or bad, it at least gets ones in place and then allows you to make additional chart of account lines in there. So when you're putting your financial statements in order, it's the things are set up to say, hey, these are all my sales items, these are my expenses. And so it does a nice job of that. It also has a lot of pre-made reports that you can look at to say, hey, what's my open accounts receivable? How many bills do I need to pay? And then always your necessary financial statements, profit and loss, and balance sheet. So it has that well. It's pretty easy to upload invoices. So if you have an invoice that you need to be paid and your vendor sends it to you, in a PDF, you can just upload that PDF to QuickBooks and it has some OCR in it and it can read it and say, hey, we think this is the name or we think this is what it's for. And then you go in and you kind of just finish that off to make sure that it goes there. So that helps with time. So much of it used to be hand keying everything in, and now there's some time savers. So, looking at QuickBooks, it's really easy to set up and implement and plug in whatever additional software components you may be pairing up with it. QuickBooks is really easy. You go to their website, they have a pricing structure, a couple of different tiers that by looking at what you need, it's fairly easy to select which one is the best fit for you. Once you do that, you click and you pay, put your credit card on there, and the system's ready to go. It does ask you a couple questions during the setup. Are you an LLC or are you a sole proprietor, S corp? And that helps set up on the balance sheet side of things your equity accounts. And then it'll ask, industry you're in, and that helps get the account set up for your chart of accounts. So it makes it really easy. If you have a third party software you want to use, like a Gusto or an ADP, those pair up really nicely. So once you get QuickBooks set up, they have a whole integration side. You just click on it, select the other software that you're using, and then you pair those up and the data will flow back and forth, which is really helpful. So it makes it pretty much anybody can do it for the most part. You will get to a point that, hey, maybe when it needs to be more complex to have somebody come in that knows it well, but otherwise anybody can get it going. So, with looking at the right people to help you run QuickBooks, you always want to integrate with your CPA's office, and QuickBooks makes that easy as well. Going in and adding your CPA to it just by clicking the accounting firm for a user. And that way, your CPA can look at it different times during the year. It helps that when you're tax planning, you can get on a call, they can see all of the data real time with you and walk you through different things. The other thing with some maintenance you'll see is just with everything, there's security. And your bank accounts, every so many months or days, they will say they need to be reconnected to QuickBooks. And so you'll just have to go in, put your information in there. And sometimes the same thing will be with the third party solutions. The connection just needs to be refreshed every once in a while to keep the data flowing back. You should get a notification that it needs to be reconnected, but not always. And the way you'll know is, hey, you know what, I'm not seeing some of the expenses coming in from my payroll software and not being able to match when I'm reconciling. And so this will be a good way to say, hey, wait a second, let me just go in and refresh these connections. A lot of times I think you'll hear all throughout probably the business community, various articles, how much people love or hate QuickBooks. And I think a lot of times there's so many haters out there and they just sometimes hate to hate. And then other reasons, there's reasons too. I think as QuickBooks has gone and it's moved more from working with accountants and maybe people that are very skilled in financial software, it's kind of dumbed down the solution. Good example is it wants to tell you you have to have specific chart of accounts. It wants you to set them up a specific way. When you are an accountant like myself and you have the financial experience, you don't want certain things to be set up and you want that control like they used to give you when you had the desktop version. Other things they try to do is they want you to map all your general ledger accounts to a tax form. Maybe you don't want to do that. There's certain things like that of QuickBooks is trying to take some control that they don't need to have. And other things is a lot of times when they do various updates, I always say they didn't ask the accountants whether this was a good update. They just thought it was a good update because they're engineers and tech people. And they're like, hey, this is really cool to have for our software solution. And it's like, yeah, it's great. Not really. I would like something else. So looking at that, and I think there's some frustrations even with them saying, hey, we do inventory. Good example. QuickBooks loves to tell you they kind of do inventory. They don't. They can't manage to save their life. It's not a good solution. And I think there's certain things that small business owners, when they're first getting into looking at software, QuickBooks is the name. It's like Coke, it's like Xerox. It is the name that everybody knows to go to. And that's what they use instead of maybe looking at, are there other software solutions out there? And while they're very minimal on what would be best for a company just starting. And so that's why most people default to QuickBooks. But I would say they're limited on reporting too. And there's certain reports that you will need, and you're going to have to drop and manipulate them inside Excel to get what you need. But overall, in the very beginning stages, I think there's a lot more to like. And it's when you get more complex in your company and your financial needs that QuickBooks becomes like sandpaper with yourself.